Why do some people break quietly, while others break violently? What turns a protector into a predator, a police chief into a cold, calculated killer? And the most unsettling question of all, how can you truly know if someone close to you is already standing at the edge of that psychological cliff, smiling, functioning, pretending, while something catastrophic grows beneath their skin? In this case, that hidden fracture didn't exist in a stranger, a criminal, or a drifter. It existed in Timothy Dean, a man entrusted with authority, trained to detect danger and educated in the mechanics of human behavior. A man who once commanded respect, resources, and responsibility. But the sharpest knives don't break. They snap. And when they do, they cut deeper. This is the story of how a trained lawman used his skills not to pursue justice, but to execute revenge. And how investigators, using behavioral science, methodical reconstruction, and psychological forensics, dismantled a crime committed by someone who thought he understood exactly how to get away with it. It begins with a principle every experienced detective knows. Before a murder is committed, it is committed in the mind. And the mind responsible for this double homicide didn't belong to just one person. It belonged to a pair, Timothy Dean and Charlene Childers, connected through a dangerous blend of emotional instability, resentment, and a shared need to regain control of a life spiraling beyond their influence. When Childers lost custody of her children to Joshua Niles, a wound formed deep inside her. But not the kind that bleeds, the kind that festers. Psychologists call it identity collapse, the moment a person feels stripped of the role that defines them. When that collapse happens, the mind doesn't just crave revenge, it craves correction. A resetting of the universe in their favor. Childers didn't just want justice. She wanted equilibrium restored. And in that distorted mindset, Joshua and Amber were not people. They were obstacles. But wanting harm doesn't create homicide. It creates fantasy. To turn fantasy into murder, the mastermind always needs someone with ability, access, and psychological detachment. Someone like Dean. When Dean agreed to travel nearly 1,400 miles from Texas to New York, investigators later recognized the pattern instantly, because planned killers almost always demonstrate the same behavior. Travel distance becomes a psychological alibi. The killer tells himself, "If I'm far from home, I'm far from suspicion." But that's not how forensic investigation works. In fact, distance often narrows the focus because investigators ask, who would travel this far unless their motive was personal? This principle, the distance paradox rule, has solved countless cases, and it became one of the first cracks in Dean's attempted cover. He believed training would make him invisible, but training is never perfect insulation. Even the most calculated offenders leave ripples, changes in routine, unusual purchases, uncharacteristic travel patterns, sudden isolation. Behavior always betrays intention. It's one of the first things experienced investigators look for. And Timothy Dean was leaking behavioral red flags like water through a cracked pipe. To understand Dean's mental descent, investigators used a combination of offender profiling, victimology, stress personality assessment, forensic behavior mapping. They discovered something fascinating. Dean wasn't driven by a single motive, but by a cluster of psychological triggers. Loss of authority, his role as chief was slipping away. Emotional entanglement, Childers fed his need for relevance. Criminal rationalization, he believed the victims deserved consequences. Identity erosion, his personal life was collapsing under accusations in Texas. When investigators see this pattern, they know what it means. The offender isn't killing someone else, they're killing their own sense of failure. Joshua and Amber were collateral damage in Dean's internal war. This is the point that grabs viewers by the throat, because every killer starts as a human, and every human has breaking points. When Dean executed the double homicide, the crime scene revealed method rather than madness. There was no chaotic flailing, no disorganized panic often seen in impulsive killings. Instead, the patterns were deliberate. Victims approached quickly, shots fired with precision, escape route pre-planned, minimal time spent on location. Investigators read crime scenes like diaries. And this one told them the killer wasn't improvising. He was following a mental checklist. But even the most well-trained offenders forget one universal truth. Planning reduces emotion, but it cannot erase it. Psychologists analyzing the scene saw tiny details that contradicted the idea of a cold professional. Signs of urgency, miscalculations in timing, inconsistencies in escape strategy. Because underneath the training, the killer was still a human being with fear, adrenaline, and emotional distortion. Dean wanted the crime to look surgical, but it was. It was personal, and personal crimes always bleed clues. Investigators began piecing behavior to timeline and timeline to motive. Every step of Dean's journey created data points. And modern investigation is brutal. It doesn't rely on confession. It relies on connective evidence, the kind offenders don't even realize they create. Car rentals, travel logs, phone pings, fuel receipts, digital shadows. This is called micro-trail analysis, and it's the nightmare of anyone who thinks distance can hide intent. Dean's micro-trails synced perfectly with the crime window, and the moment investigators aligned the evidence, the motive crystallized. Everything pointed back to Childers, the emotional nucleus of the case. And emotional nuclei always crack under pressure. She did exactly what experienced detectives expect. She broke first. Her statements exposed Dean's involvement, and with psychological triangulation, Timothy Dean's downfall wasn't evidence. It was ego, the ego of a man who once held authority, the ego of someone who believed his experience made him superior, the ego of a trained professional who thought knowledge of the system meant immunity from the system. Experienced investigators study this phenomenon. It's called authority overconfidence syndrome. Offenders with backgrounds in law enforcement, military, or security often commit mistakes civilians never make because they assume they're already 2 steps ahead. In reality, they're 2 steps behind because investigators already know the patterns that come from trained minds attempting criminal behavior. Dean wasn't special. He was predictable. When the court delivered its sentence, life without parole, it wasn't just punishing a killer. It was punishing a betrayal. The betrayal of a badge, the betrayal of a community, the betrayal of the psychological foundations that allow citizens to trust law enforcement. People see officers as protectors, but when a protector collapses, the damage is deeper because the fall feels heavier. And that's what chills viewers long after the video ends. If a police chief can break this way, what about the people around us who don't even have that training? The ones without discipline, without structure, without oversight. The truth in criminal psychology is haunting. A killer is not born in the moment they pull the trigger. They are born in the moments they stop believing they have anything left to lose. Timothy Dean reached that moment, and instead of asking for help, he drove across the country to silence the world he blamed for his collapse. This case isn't about revenge. It's about identity, insecurity, and the terrifying possibility that the people meant to protect us are sometimes the ones most capable of doing the opposite. Because the most dangerous killers are not strangers. They're the ones who know exactly how the system works and believe they can twist it around their own darkness. And that is the coldest truth of all.